keep saying okay because I'm just like so excited to be making this video and talking to you. I just have to give a little disclaimer that I sound a little sick because I have been sick for several days now. Ever since I got back from my trip, which is why I delayed this video because I'm still sick. I'm here to talk to you about top 10 books of 2024, sneak peek. I'm so excited to talk to you guys about these 10 books. I had way more books that I read that I really enjoyed this past year or last year. Now it's last year, but these are like the top 10 that I would definitely probably reread. I would definitely recommend. Still stuck in my brain, like some way or the other, they're stuck in my brain. So I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna tell you about the books. Obviously, I'll tell you what I remembered, what was most memorable to me from each book, and then yeah. So to kind of set the scene for you guys, I finished 2024 with 65 books read, which is kind of like, that's kind of the average for me. Usually, like, I think within the last like 6-7 years that I've been tracking on Goodreads and now Fable and whatever, I've usually landed between 50 and like 80 books. So this is very much the norm for me. I wish I could be one of those girlies who reads like 100+ books. I am a little jealous of the girls who read 100 books, but I'm not one of them. So, and we don't compare on this channel. Okay? That is something that I am trying to keep focus on. I'm glad that I read any books at all. I mean, there have been years in the past where I barely hit 5. So good for me. I'm happy with it. And you should be happy with however many books you read as well. Okay, without further ado, I'm not going in any order because I think it's really, really hard to organize what books would be like first versus 10th. They kind of switch up based off of my feelings of that day, based on my mood that day. I genuinely am such a mood reader and such a mood person with like books and actually anything, that I genuinely couldn't tell you which one of these is like my top of the year. Maybe that'll change over time, but right now I just couldn't. I've been thinking about this for a couple weeks now. 7 out of the 10 books that I read. A couple of them I bought before knowing anything about them, and a couple of them I bought after reading them and really loving them. So yeah, really happy about that too, because usually I don't have on hand a lot of the books that I read. I have been trying to buy less books, and it is a new year, and this year so far I have not bought a single book. I failed spectacularly when I went to Ireland, although those were all Christmas gifts from my mom, so I didn't buy them. It was so funny because I was feeling kind of guilty and I was like, oh my god, I bought so many books, and some of them were from secondhand stores and some of them were from like a proper bookstore. Not that secondhand bookstores aren't, but like it was like from an independent bookstore. My mom was like, you're supporting the arts. I was like, you know what, that's true. From now on, if anyone ever tells you you're buying too many books, tell them no, I'm just supporting the arts. They're right. My mom's right. Say my friend's mom said buying books is supporting the arts. Let's get into it. Some of these obviously are from earlier in the year, so I won't have too much to tell you about them. I thought about like making notes and stuff, but I really want to approach this with the POV of like, this is what stuck with me from these books. I didn't have to do extra research to like remember what happens, okay? Anyone can Google what happens in the books. So I'm just gonna tell you my perspective. Okay. So the first one we're going to talk about is Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. This was definitely one of my favorite reads of the year. I think what I remember the most about this, other than the fact that the fantasy was so well like threaded throughout the narrative, and I loved the main character because she was struggling with like her sexuality. There is some abuse, like family abuse in the story. The narrator kind of, and our main character, kind of going against the grain of the standards set by her family, specifically by her father. I also just, the one thing I remember about this book, it was one of those very beautiful, like, I want to say rare, but all writing really does this to me, but I think like one of the rare books where as I was actively reading this, I was like, I wish I could write like this. There's a lot of books that the writing is so well done, and I mean like in the prose that's being used, in the threading of the narrative and how you do that so subtly, that I really was like, I wish I wrote this book. I wish I wrote this book. Like, this is one of those books, that's how I can explain it the best, is this is one of those books that I wish I wrote, because like I love this book. I'm so glad I picked it up, because after reading Wolf and the Woodsman as an audiobook, I didn't really like that one. So I was a little bit hesitant to pick this one up, and I ended up picking it up because of the cover. Yes, we do judge books by their cover on this channel. No, I just thought it was such a pretty cover. I mean, like, wow, look at that. And also I'd heard that other people had read this book and they really enjoyed it. I love this book. This is one of my favorite books of 2024. Witches, you have magic, actors in plays. I love this book so much. Another book with like amazing writing. It was so addicting. I need to like show the book before I start yapping about it. But the next book on my list is Woman Eating by Kohda. I picked this up as an audiobook actually, and I remember distinctly where I was, what I was doing. I finished this in one go. It was so well written. The story was so interesting. And the writing is addicting. It's soft, it's seductive. Essentially what I remember about this book is that it is about a girl who is a vampire. Her mother was also a vampire, and she's very much drawn to blood, obviously, as a result. She has kind of like a very specific diet, and she's trying very much to restrict herself. And I think that's what was so cool about this book, is that like the narrator the whole time is struggling. And this felt, I don't think I'm the first one to say this, but this felt like a metaphor for disordered eating. You know, that whole like binging versus restricting yourself, versus like trying to restrict something for yourself causes you to then always be thinking about it all the time, constantly. And it was just so well done, because as a story on its surface, it was so well written. The narrative was so interesting. I was very much rooting for the character I kind of wanted her to engage in certain activities that she didn't want to engage in herself, because I was like, I almost like, you want to see the character unravel and see what happens, because they're so self-controlled and trying to discipline themselves so much and trying to be so restrictive, that I was just like, I was waiting for her to unravel. Unraveling in this story would essentially be giving into that desire for drinking blood. To me, this felt addicting when the blood in essence is addicting for our main character. So that kind of connection and that thread as a reader, that you're reading this story, as well as the character that's engaging in the narrative and is part of that narrative, I thought it was really well done. Love this book. So that is Women Eating by Kohda. Next one on my list, again, this is not in any order, okay, but the next one on my list is Funny Story by Emily Henry. I don't own a copy of that. I actually only own a copy of Beach Read, which is crazy. I feel like I should own more copies of Emily Henry books. Funny Story. I have to talk about this one for a bit, because I have pretty much loved every single Emily Henry book that I have read. They obviously are in scales. Beach Read is my favorite. I also really loved Happy Place. The one book that has stayed at the bottom of the barrel, bottom tier, I do not like it. And it's not because Emily, it's not through any fault of Emily Henry herself. It's just, I hate that trope, is People We Meet on Vacation. I despised that book. And now you might be wondering to yourself, Zahra, why are you talking about People We Meet on Vacation? Like, we are talking about Funny Story. Let me tell you, one of the biggest reasons I loved this story, aside from it being a good story on its own, like it stands on its own two legs, but one of the biggest reasons why I love the story is because I think that this is the revenge all of us who read People We Meet on Vacation needed against the two best friends. I didn't like People We Meet on Vacation because I just don't like this trope of like, you're with someone else, but the whole time you want to be with somebody else. Like, you're with someone and the whole time you're thinking like, oh my god, my best friend, like I just wish he would admit that he's in love with me so we could be together. Like, don't be in a relationship with someone else if you're in love with, like, don't be in a relationship with someone if you're in love with someone else. Like, I hate that. That's another reason why I hate that trope that's in like How I Met Your Mother, where it's like, oh, I get with someone because the only reason I'm with someone is because I can't be with someone else. Like, no, miss me with that shit. I hate that. Or it's like, oh, me waiting until X person dies so I could be with Y person. No, be alone then. Okay, I could rant about this forever. So I loved Funny Story because of the story itself, because of how the characters meet, because of the whole, like, this book is for the anti-people we meet on vacation girlies, and it delivered. It delivered. And obviously, Emily Henry, we all know her, we all love her. She's amazing at threading narratives. She's amazing at creating chemistry between her characters. She's amazing at finding these, like, non-conventional ways of having her characters get together, but it's still believable, it still makes sense. And also, her, like, smutty scenes are not cringe. Okay? She does a decent job, okay? There's nothing in her, like, books that sticks to me and I'm like, oh my god, I'm going to be, like, traumatized from this memory for the rest of my life. So yeah, I loved Funny Story. I listened to it as an audiobook. Julia Whalen, which is also, I adore her. She does such a good job narrating audiobooks. She reads that story and it was phenomenal. This was so fun to read. Definitely in the top tiers. Again, I don't think there's any Emily Henry book other than People We Meet on Vacation that I didn't like. Did I like some of them more or less than others? Yes. But generally speaking, I love her books. So that's Funny Story by Emily Henry. Thank you, Emily Henry, for delivering. I forgive you for People We Meet on Vacation. Whatever. Now, we're going to take a very weird 180 turn because we're going to go into a nonfiction book I read this year, which is the only nonfiction book on this list that I really enjoyed reading, that really stuck with me. As the author himself talks about, it haunted me, and it must be no surprise to any of you that the book that I am talking about is The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I read this like in the fall months. I got it on my Kindle. Thankfully, the hold came in very fast, and it just really stuck with me. It stuck with me as a student. It stuck with me as an instructor. It stuck with me as a reader, as a writer. It really just struck me in a lot of different ways. Many of the things that he talks about resonate. The idea of understanding, quote unquote, all sides of a story, or both sides of a story, or where we put our attention to when it comes to who we put the microphones in front of in publishing, but in the news, or in any sort of, popular media, and how important that is to kind of redirect the attention at points when too much attention is given to one certain area or one certain group of people or one certain ideology over the other. It's very beautiful. The importance of representation, the importance of storytelling, the importance of identity, and the importance of humanity. I love this book so much. Definitely something I would reread at a certain point. And something that I have so many highlights from on my Kindle that I should probably at some point tab in the physical copy. But I really love this book, and it was, in some ways, it told me things that I already knew, but it brought my attention back to those things. And in other ways, it brought new perspective or a new framework for looking at certain things in life in a different way than I was used to, or a different way than I had trained myself to, if that makes sense. If you're in the market for a nonfiction book, it reads so well too. I think that's what I liked about this so much, is a lot of nonfiction books, they read very much as like fact after fact after fact, and this didn't feel that way. This felt like a realistic narrative almost. I love this book, definitely one of my favorites of last year. So that is The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Another very quick left turn now. We're going back to fiction, but we are going to classics, and the next book that I want to tell you guys about is from my first ever reading vlog. Yeah, because I've only done 2 so far, and I'm actively doing the 3rd one. But my very first reading vlog, which I had so much fun with. I enjoyed so much. Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. But Phantom of the Opera, this was such a fun read. This was so exciting, engaging. I loved being in that space of the opera house. It felt like an entire world of its own, which was so cool to be drawn into a different world that is like realistic enough, right? It's part of our real world. But when you can center your story around a place and not just make the characters feel alive, but also make the place feel like a living person, and not in the way that a lot of fantasy stories do, but more so in the way of like, because it's so alive, because there are so many facets to it that you're learning about, it is so interesting to be in that place. You feel like you're there. And then obviously the narrative itself was so fun to follow. There were a lot of moments that I was just like, oh my God. And I loved the cast of characters, particularly the Phantom. So a very fun read. Highly recommend, especially if you love classics and you haven't picked this one up yet. I would say go for this one, because I also love classics and I hadn't picked this one up in a long time, even though I had it on my shelf, and I'm so glad that I did. I need to get a better copy of this. But also I love old copies, so maybe I don't. Anyway, okay. So that is Phantom of the Opera. The next book should come as absolutely no surprise, and we are going to talk about a book that I have kind of been raving about a lot, especially the last couple months. The last month specifically, I think. I read this on my Kindle. I used the airplane mode trick because I was reading it. It was taking me so long. Loved it so much that I bought a copy, and I bought a copy in Ireland. Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. So this book is about two siblings in the wake of their father's death. They're dealing with grief. They're dealing with complicated relationships to each other, as well as to different women in their lives, to their mother, to their dog, and finding their footing in the world. And there were so many things that struck me with this novel, even though it was a complicated book to read and pay attention to because of the writing style, because of certain artistic choices that Sally Rooney made. Even though it was kind of hard to kind of follow sometimes, it was still so beautifully written. The scenes, like something that I will always remember with this book is there's a specific scene between the two brothers where they go from kind of just having dinner to a full out like blown up fight. And it's not like a physical fight, as far as I remember. I don't think it got physical though. I remember reading that and just after that scene just pausing and being like, how did she just capture like that sort of tension and like put it down so well? You know what I mean? Like she did such a good job with demonstrating like complicated sibling family relationships, and that is something that just sticks with me to this day. Every time I think about Intermezzo, that scene comes to my mind, because I think that like to me that was kind of core of the novel, one of the main cores of the novel that stuck with me. And I thought it was amazing. Like this is definitely, again, I keep saying this about every single book that I show you guys and talk to you about, but it genuinely is because I think I would reread a lot of these books that are on this list, and that's part of the reason why they are favorites. And I actually very recently, I'll show you at some point soon, but literally like last night sat down and reorganized my entire bookshelf because of all these new favorites, and I wanted to kind of display them better. So yeah, Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. It's worth it. If you can get past the complicated writing, if you can get past the clunky sentences sometimes and the lack of quotation marks, it's worth it. Sally Rooney, Intermezzo. Thank you, Sally Rooney. This will stay in my brain forever. All right, so the next book we're going to talk about is again another book that I read during my second reading vlog, which I think is pretty cool to think that out of the 2 reading vlogs I did last year, because I started doing this more regularly last year, got one favorite book out of each. I think that's pretty good. That's a pretty good, like, I don't know. I think that means that at least when I'm picking up physical books, I have a pretty good chance of picking up a new favorite. Sure, you probably guessed, if you've read my, I mean, if you've watched my other videos, you've probably guessed this is going to be on the list. The Raven Boys. I actually got Dream Thieves on my Kindle, but I don't have time to read. I have not just don't have time to read. I've been in such a reading slump, and I know if I pick up the next book of this one, I probably will get out of it, but I'm also been having a hard time, guys, reading. Anyway, that's all we're here to talk about. But oh my god, I read this for my second reading vlog, which was my favorite reading vlog so far, even though I've only done 2. It was so fun. Reading through this on the camera and capturing my reactions in real time was so fun, and I kind of realized how fun it is to interactively read with this book because it was so enjoyable. This was such a fun read. I fell in love with all of the characters. There were so many things that like I didn't predict, which I think is always fun. I don't entirely try to predict things in the books that I read. Like I'm just in it for the ride. What happens a lot of times in a lot of the books I read is that I figure it out without really having to try. With this one, there were a lot of surprises. Especially there was one specific surprise that I'm thinking about with this one. Prose was easy to consume. The narrative itself was unique. I've never really read anything like this before. I have no knowledge of Welsh mythology. So on the back it says that like it has to do with Welsh mythology. I don't know anything about it, and I thought that was super interesting. I talked about this to death in that video, so if you want to go watch it if you haven't, that is The Raven Boys by Maggie stievfater. Honestly, such a good time. Literally so excited to read the next book. It's just that I've been in a little bit of a reading slump and I'm feeling hesitant to pick anything up. But yeah, that's that one. Next book that we're going to talk about, I don't own a copy, but I probably eventually want to get one, and that is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I read this as an audiobook. I thought the narrator did such a good job. This was such an interesting read. It's a critique on the publishing industry, on the tokenization of non-white people, this idea of fitting into the mold that the publishing or even like pop media, just generally society wants you to fit into, slash trying to be something that you're not. There's so much going on in this novel. In my December books wrap up, I kind of talked about how something that I found so fascinating with this novel is sometimes, even though the narrator was so insane, there were moments when I was like, maybe she has a point. And then I was like, no, girl, you do have a point. You're crazy. But I think that's a testament to the writing and to the storytelling that you can have such an absurd narrator and still make her convincing enough. So this is the story of this girl, June, who her Asian friend dies and she borrows her manuscript to publish. I talked a lot about it in that video very recently, so I won't go into too much detail, but that was definitely one of the more interesting books that I read last year. And also I think the other thing that was really cool about this one is that I think the audiobook narrator did such a good job. And I listened to so many audiobooks in my year, especially because like I drive around a lot, I go a lot of places, and I do a lot of things like chores and whatever in my house. And it's always so easy to just pop on an audiobook and listen to it. And you'll have some that are kind of mid, and then you'll have some that are really bad, and you're just like, I either turn this book off right now and read it myself, or I'm gonna hate this book because of the audiobook narrator. And then you have really good ones. I really enjoyed this one. So that's Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. 2 more books to go. Foster by Keegan. I don't know how much this counts as a book, and I'd be interested to know what you guys think, because for me this is a book. Like, to me, in my head, it's like, okay, this is a book, right? Because it's just a book, right? But I do realize that, like, the size of a book like this versus the size of a book like this, it just, like, interesting. So that's a conversation we can have later on. Anyway, regardless of what this counts as, I read Foster by Keegan. This was actually the last book that I read last year, and I really enjoyed this. It is so short. It's only 88 pages, and as you can see, let me show you, like, the margins are pretty big, so it's only like this much writing per page. Ooh. Right, so not a lot of words either. And so you might be thinking to yourself, how is a book so small ending up on my top 10 list? And I will tell you. I think that this book was so well done. It just leaves you with something. And going back to the message and ta-nehisi Coates writing about how writing and books, how these things should haunt you, this haunted me. It struck a chord in me that like I couldn't let go of or forget after I finished reading it. But even though it didn't take me a really long time to get through, it still left me with something. This is about a girl. She's born in a poor Irish family and they have a lot of kids to take care of, and her mom is pregnant with another baby. So for like a few months, I think it was for the summer, for a small duration of time, she is sent to live with some relatives in Wexford, Ireland, which is actually where I was and where I bought this book. I didn't know that before I bought it. But I remember when I was reading it, I was unclear about like, oh, is she going to just stay there forever, or is she like, you know, just temporarily being sent there? And the whole time I was rooting for this girl to get a life that I wanted her. Like, that's what I'm trying to say, is like I developed an attachment to the main character and even the other characters surrounding her in a way that I didn't really think was all that possible in like 88 pages. That's why this is on this list, is because it packs a punch. It's like something that you can read in such a short amount of time that will stay with you for a long time afterwards. And I think that is the goal of any piece of writing, of any story, is for it to stay with you after you're done reading it. Foster by Claire Keegan. I absolutely adored this book. Highly recommend to anyone who's looking for a short read. This will get you out of a slump. I feel like this is one of those books that actually would get you out of a slump. Last but not least, I don't own a copy of this book, but I want to buy one for sure at some point. I actually don't think I've ever even seen it in stores. I'd have to order it online probably. But last but not least, the book that I am going to leave you with, Crescent by Diana Abu Jaber. My friend who is doing like a PhD in Arab American literature recommended this book to me. And it took me a while to get through it, not because the book was bad, but because I think I was like struggling at that point in time. This was around the time where I picked up a bunch of different books and I just felt like I couldn't finish anything. Later on in the year, after I had like read some of it and then Kindle took my book away and then I got it back, I was like, okay, let's just sit and like commit to finishing this. Let's see what happens. And I absolutely love this book. It follows Serene, who is a cook in a small cafe. I don't know if you can hear the crows. Anyway, she's a chef in a small cafe in a university. She meets Hanif, who is a professor in the university, and our story goes on from there. You have the interweaving of like folk tale, almost like fictional stories that are told by her uncle, happening alongside her own story. You also have a lot, like there's so much that struck a chord with me with this book, including like the conversation on immigration, the conversation on identity, of being from multiple places but living in a different place than you're from, ethnically, or like, you know, your homeland is different from the home that you're in. It was such a beautiful novel. And I think one thing that I really remember from this book, other than the main relationship, which I don't want to give anything away because I feel like it's so fun to read on your own, and certain things happen that you're like, what is happening? But other than the main relationships and like all the characters that I completely fell in love with, but one thing I remember so distinctly from this book is that because Serene is a chef, you get a lot of like cooking language. You get a lot of smells and like the act of cooking, the act of chopping and putting food together. And I'm gonna start salivating if I don't stop thinking about it, because it was so yummy. Like, this book was so delicious. I know it's probably a weird way to explain it, but it was so delicious. Like, the foods that were being made and the way that Serene was going about making them, and like how much culture is tied to delicacy and food and whatever, like even the ingredients that you're using. I just absolutely loved, and no pun intended, but maybe a little bit intended, but I devoured this book once I actually got into it and, you know, took the time to pay attention. That is Crescent by Diana Abu-Jaber. Those are the 10 books that I absolutely loved in 2024. Obviously, there were a lot more books that I read that I enjoyed, but these are like the top 10 that truly just stuck in my brain for a really long time, and I think will stick in my brain for a really long time to come. Books that left an impact on me, and I honestly, like, all I return to as I continue to read different books and as I continue to consume even different media is that at the end of the day, story matters so much, and what matters the most is what any given book leaves with you. While I do think that there is a general standard of like a good book versus a bad book, like I think there are some things you can quantify with literature. There's a lot that you can't, that's subjective, and it just really comes down to the kind of reader you are, the kind of books that you like, your taste and your style of reading, and then also what's important to you, and so what resonates in any given book. I don't think it's silly or ridiculous to, you know, enjoy a certain genre over another, because at the end of the day, if that book is important to you, if that book struck something into you, whether it's joy, whether it's entertainment, whether it's pure enjoyment, like that makes it valuable. So yeah, let me know what your favorite books were. Let me know what you've been reading recently, how your reading is going, how many books did you read last year? Tell me everything. Still figuring out the the technicalities of like operating my channel. So thank you for being patient with me as I learn, and thank you for joining me. Thank you for being here. As always, it's so fun to, you know that people are watching and responding and care. I will hopefully see you guys in another video very soon. And yeah, goodbye.